Hey, so today we have Peter with Rutter. Peter, how you doing?
I'm good. How about you, Joe?
Doing great. So tell me about your company. It looks pretty cool.
Rutter, we like to think ourselves as the connected API data layer for e-commerce. So what that means is basically you've got all of these products and services out there that are trying to serve as many storefronts and store owners as they can. But a store can be built in any different number of places. So Shopify, WooCommerce, BigCommerce, Squarespace, Wix, etc. And each of those places has their own schema and their own way for fetching and accessing and writing this data. And so what we did at Rutter is we made a universal API that lets any of these products or services cleanly fetch a standardized set of data from these platforms, no matter what platform the store owner comes from. So it's a really easy way to scalably serve all store owners across any platform if you're a product or service.
Awesome. Thanks for the background. So when did you start the company?
We've been working for around, I think we're at maybe like the 10-month mark. We started sometime mid last year.
So I looked at your LinkedIn before the call. You have great experience. You could probably work at any company in Silicon Valley. What made you take that leap from going like, okay, I could have this safe, steady job to I'm going to take this huge risk and start my own company?
Man, that's a great question. So I guess to take a step back, previously I interned at Facebook. I was on the payments team at Facebook. And then I actually had a brief stint where I dropped out of school for a bit to work on a startup company called Atrium. They managed legal services. That was actually one of my first forays into startups. And ultimately what I realized is I think I valued the autonomy of setting my own vision and working towards that over working on other people's visions. And so that's a huge driver of what causes us to work on a startup.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. But from like a personal standpoint, when you made that leap and you're like, okay, I'm 100% committed, what was going through your head? Like, were you afraid or were you like, okay, I'm 100% committed. Fear can't really matter at this point.
It's definitely 100% committed. I think it's important to recognize that there is fear and acknowledge that fear, but ultimately like a huge part of life is being able to overcome that fear and make the leaps on doing things that you didn't think were possible before. So we've definitely grown a ton, me and my co-founder, in the last 2 years, and it wouldn't have been if not we like took the leap to do this. So
good advice. So how did you guys meet?
We've actually been, so Eric's my co-founder and CTO. We've been friends since I think he was like my third friend at Yale, actually, where we went to college.
Nice.
So yeah, one of my very early friends. We've known each other for like 6 or 7 years at this point.
That's great. So you've taken the leap. When did you have something that happened where you were like, okay, like now we have some serious momentum, like we have to keep, like we're really excited about this?
Yeah. So for Rutter, I can actually tell you a little bit about how we started out. So actually, when we started working on Rutter, which is this unified data layer, we were actually helping out a bunch of ed tech vendors. And so basically, we had seen what the impact the pandemic had on children and their ability to go to school. And so now a lot of people were moving remote. They were buying their own homeschool ed tech supplies. And where we started to get hints that there was actual problems here and something to work on was we had been working with ed tech vendors and one, processing invoices for them, and then two, helping them list their products on other channels. And so basically we had a friend, she was selling like books and subscription kits, and she was looking to sell these on Amazon. And so we would write some code to move all of her products over from Shopify over to Amazon. She introduced us to her friends, and they were on a bunch of other different stores. So WooCommerce, Wix, and we basically ended up writing this exact same script to port products over from each of these other stores into Amazon. And that's sort of when we realized, hey, we've got something here, because all these people are looking to do this very simple thing, which is listing a product in a different place. But as a developer, you had to do a lot of work per platform to get that done.
Very interesting. So you didn't really fall into this, but you were definitely like moving in a direction. And then would you say you discovered it based on just working on this problem?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So one thing that I always like to tell people, and something I've heard from a lot of other founders, is like the best advice is like, you just have to get started, because until you get started and start talking to customers and figuring out like where the problems are, you'll never actually know like 100% what you need to be working on. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I mean, especially for founders that are technically minded as well, I think the instinct for a lot of people is one, to either build something out completely until it's perfect and then send it out into the wild, or two, you might be so paralyzed by that fear of rejection or your product not actually working or helping people out in the way that it's intended to, that you never even get started. So definitely what we've learned over the years is you've got to identify problems that your users have and just push out the minimum solution that works for them. And that's the stepping point towards making a great product where you can get feedback from them and iterate on what works and what doesn't.
Completely agree. And it sounds like, and I have this experience from previous companies, sometimes product people want to make things perfect instead of getting something out there and then getting feedback. That kind of sounds like what you're saying, like more of an iterative process instead of trying to make the most perfect thing and take the most time to get it done.
Yeah, perfect is the enemy of good. That's the common saying. So as long as the most important thing is that you solve problems that people have, as long as you do that, perfect doesn't matter. It just needs to solve this problem. And then once you've identified there being a real problem and having a real solution to that problem, then you can spend the time making it as good as it can be.
Totally agree. One thing I learned at my last company was the priority of the problem is very important too. So if this is a problem that is a priority for them to solve, they don't need a perfect solution. If it's a nice to have, you better have everything perfect, and it has to work flawlessly and it has to do all these specific things. But yeah, like you're saying, find that problem, identify it, give them a good solution, and then you can iterate and make things perfect as you go. But first you want to make sure you validate it. So tell me about a rejection, because you touched upon that like very briefly, and this is kind of a theme that I've been getting into with people. Obviously, being a founder is not going to just be everyone giving you money and checks for your products. You're going to get a lot of rejection. How do you deal with rejection?
I mean, right before that, I would want to say, like, a lot of what you see out there, you see companies raising, you see them exploding in revenue, they're on the news and everything. Those are like the 5% of good days that you see. The reality of startups is actually it's mostly 95% bad days. So a lot of just grinding, a lot of rejection, a lot of things not working out. And the only things that you see in the public are when good times are happening. So I guess to answer your question, first, you need to have super thick skin. Like, none of the rejections that you get when people don't want your product, none of them are personal. It's just not solving a problem for them. And so what I like to do is definitely seeing it more as experiments to run, like taking the question of, do they have this problem and am I able to solve this in a good way, as more of a hypothesis or more impersonal than treating that as like, oh, this is tied to like who I am as a person. And if I don't solve this problem, if I haven't identified a problem, then I must not be like that great of an operator. That's definitely something that's helped.
Yeah, the positioning it as an experiment is an interesting way of putting it. And from an experiment, like it works or it doesn't work, but it's not a reflection on you. You learn something from the experiment, and then the next experiment you run, maybe it works this time and it gets you one step closer to that yes. So what keeps you motivated through those rejections? Because we're all human. Sometimes you get a lot of rejections and it's a really down week, and then sometimes it's like everyone wants to do business with you. Tell me how you're able to manage those bad weeks, because we both know they occur on a pretty semi-regular basis at points.
Yeah, we've definitely had a lot of dark times. I guess what keeps you going? I think when you start a company, people do it for a bunch of reasons. You need to have a solid reason to do it. And it's not for the money or anything. It's about making a difference and helping people out in the world and doing what you love doing. That's like really what it's all about. And so at the end of the day, even when things are not working out, like we kind of look at ourselves and we're like, we made this conscious decision to be here and do this. And so no matter what, we're going to go get this done. There's any other detour would not help us accomplish what we really want to do. And so that's kind of what keeps us going, is we have this singular mission in mind. And like the only way to get there is by pushing through.
Awesome. So what's been the best moment so far?
I would say last 3 months have been amazing for us. We found a lot of really interesting customer segments to dig into, and we've been growing like crazy for the last 3 months. So definitely feeling really good right now.
That's awesome to hear. From an outsider's perspective, so someone who doesn't know anything about the space or the technology, what would be something that they would find really surprising or interesting?
Are you talking generally about e-commerce or specifically about commerce and data integrations?
Probably less about data integrations, more about e-commerce.
I think what is super interesting that's going on right now, we actually see there's like an explosion of tools that people use. So a lot of e-commerce, I mean, they say this happened during COVID, where a lot of e-commerce has accelerated massively in the last 10 years. And where we see a lot of this happening is you used to have all of these giant monoliths like Shopify and WooCommerce and BigCommerce, and that used to be everything that you would need to run a store. What we're seeing now is all of these different tools like email marketing platforms, chargeback platforms, warranty platforms, insurance, any type of post-purchase experience. There are just so many things that go into making the stack of an e-commerce store out there. And there's just like an explosion of even more and more tools that are out there to help store owners nowadays than there was before.
Do you think there's a tool bubble?
Definitely not. I actually think it's very similar. What's happening in e-commerce right now is super similar to what happened in, for example, like tech software. So one of the jokes within tech is like any company, they use like 20 to 30 SaaS tools. And the thing is, any tool that makes a specific job better is definitely valuable for the company or for the people using that tool. And so I don't think there's a bubble, because there are just so many parts of e-commerce that a store owner has to go through. And so it makes total sense that there's a dedicated tool for each of them.
Where do you see some opportunities to potentially build new tools in the e-commerce space?
Yeah, I mean, there's a ton. So making better checkout experiences is a huge one. Any type of post-purchase product is huge. So doing any type of upsell or letting people do subscription-based buying. I think there's a company called Blackcart that does try before you buy, which is huge. And then there's a whole world around there around doing fulfillment. So taking the Amazon Prime experience and applying that to any store owner or any storefront. I think that's a huge world.
Yeah, I think so too. One space that I've always been interested in is the returns part of e-commerce.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know what the solution is, but there seems to be a massive opportunity around that, just given how many things get returned and how many times my wife has me drop things off at the post office and FedEx.
Yeah, for sure.
So tell me a little about the team that you have. Is it just you and your co-founder, or do you guys have more people on the team?
Yeah, so we've got 5 people right now. We're primarily engineering focused organization because we are this data layer for e-commerce. So everyone's basically an engineer.
Got it. And then when it comes to being a manager, do you manage the team? Like, what does that look like?
I would say me and my co-founder, Eric's CTO, so he generally manages our tech team. And then I'm a little bit more responsible for outbound sales and other miscellaneous matters.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah.
So I have a bit of a sales background. I'd love to hear about your experience as a founder doing sales. I assume that you don't have an extensive sales background before this.
No, definitely not.
But what are some things that you would advise technical founders when it comes to sales at this stage?
Yeah, I think sales is especially hard for technical founders, but coming in with no sales experience, the first thing I would say is you just got to put yourself out there. There's a lot of parallels between doing sales and just getting started with a startup as well. So I think a huge part of the fear is, fear of rejection. Oh, they don't want this product, so I probably shouldn't even talk to them in the first place. That's the wrong way of thinking about it. You really got to just force yourself to get out there and start knowing the customer better and talking to as many customers as you can.
Yep, I completely agree. At my last startup, our first 2 sales meetings ever, the first one, the guy was like, oh, I don't want this. Like, this is not going to be good. Like, nobody's going to want this. It's not a fit. I was just doing you a favor because you wrote me a nice email. And I was like, okay, that's a great start. And then the second guy, who was like 2 hours later, they were like, this is exactly what we're looking for. Can you send over a contract today? And we're like, sure. Didn't have a contract ready. And then we sent over the contract. They're like, okay, we're going to sign it. They're like, where should we send the money? And we're like, we don't have a bank account set up yet. So yeah, I think it's a good lesson to know, like, you will get rejected. We can definitely guarantee that. But the more you talk to people, the more you learn. And then people have different opinions on their problem and how to solve it. And you'll eventually figure it out if you keep at it enough, but you have to be able to keep at it enough to figure it out.
Yeah. And ultimately, again, it's a hypothesis or a game even so. So no one is going to care about how many times people said no. Your goal is to go and find the people that really need your product and be able to connect with them. And anytime that happens, that outweighs any of the rejections that you had before. So
yeah, I completely agree. I couldn't tell you all the rejections that I had in my last company. There's probably in the hundreds, probably like over 500. But then when it comes to clients, I could name every single client off the top of my head, because you lose the rejection memory. Like, you kind of build up a muscle, but you also know, okay, it's just part of the game. It's a hypothesis also when you're figuring it out early, how your messaging works, how to say things, what questions to ask. But those yeses, like one yes is worth 1,000 rejections.
Exactly, Joe.
So we only have a few more questions. I'd love to hear about the company's goals. You don't have to share any KPIs, but like, where do you want to be in 1 year and where do you want to be in 3 years?
Yeah, I think right now what we're finding as basically this data layer for e-commerce is that there are a ton of applications that people have for a connected data layer. And so our 1 year goal is to basically go out and find, we have two basically main segments right now that people use our API for. I guess three. So the first is print on demand. So people use our API to connect factories that print products or custom swag with stores to resell. The next is loaning. So people use our API to fetch orders and transactions data from stores so they can offer a better data-driven loan. And then the third is marketing. So any type of email marketing platform, they need customer and orders data to be able to send targeted campaigns to these customers. Our 1 year goal is definitely to figure out the other segments. So we're looking a lot into insurance. We're looking into embedded checkout. So if you've ever seen Instagram, they have a buying experience where you can purchase a product directly within the Instagram photo. Doing something like that across other social platforms would be insane. And then I guess our 3 year plan is to just be this unified data layer around all things e-commerce. So we have a lot to go in terms of building out more support for helping people build fulfillment products, helping people build shipping and transaction and payment products as well. So want to work on a lot of those in the next 3 years.
Yeah, that sounds great. Massive opportunity. You have a lot on your plate.
Exactly. Yeah. Very busy.
Any tools or software that you can't live without that you would recommend to other people?
Yeah, I generally love all of my tools. Notion is a really good tool that we use all the time. And probably Superhuman. I'm on my email a lot. So Superhuman is super fast email client, makes going through email way faster than using Gmail or any other client.
Yeah, I've heard good things. Only two more questions. What's your favorite business book or any business books that you would recommend to founders?
Oh my gosh. Wow. Now I have to pick favorites. There's so many business books that I would recommend. 0 to 1 is probably the classic. The Score Takes Care of Itself is a really good book. Actually, I would say The Score Takes Care of Itself is my favorite.
Okay.
Just a lot about the mentality. So this goes back to rejections and powering through when times are not good. It's all about building the discipline to keep on going rather than having more of a results-based mindset where we're only happy if this thing happens. As long as you're set on, like, you're disciplined and you set your goals on how many emails you're going to send out or how many meetings you're going to book, as the book says, the score takes care of itself.
More input focused than output focused.
Exactly.
And then last question, how can people get in contact with you?
My email is peter@rutterapi.com. Feel free to send me emails. I'll try my best to get back to everyone. And yeah, that's basically the main way to get in contact with me.
Fantastic. Thanks for the time, Peter. It's great chatting with you.
Awesome. Thanks, Joe.